Chosen one. It did not happen in church. It did not happen while the worship music was playing, or while the pastor was preaching, or while somebody stood next to you with a hand on your shoulder saying they were praying for you. It happened in the kitchen, under that tired yellow light, long after the house had gone quiet, when the plates were drying by the sink and the dishwasher hummed like background noise to a life that felt too heavy to carry one more day. It happened in the kind of American home where so much ordinary living takes place without anyone calling it holy. A ranch house in Ohio, a townhouse in Georgia, a rented apartment in Arizona, a small place in Missouri with creaky floors and a refrigerator covered in magnets, school pictures, and reminders you keep meaning to answer. It happened there, in a room filled with grocery receipts, a half-empty coffee mug, unopened mail, and the weight of everything you had been trying not to feel. And that is exactly where God saw you. Chosen one. He saw you when no one else did. He saw you standing at that counter after midnight, with your shoulders slumped and your face tired, and your heart trying to hold itself together for just a few more minutes. He saw your hand pressed against the edge of the sink, as if that cheap countertop was the only thing keeping you upright. He saw the tears you tried to blink back because, even alone, you were still in the habit of being strong. He saw the look on your face when you opened one more bill, checked one more number, read one more message, remembered one more disappointment, and felt something in you finally give way. Heaven did not miss that moment, not 1 second of it. Not the silence before the tears came, not the breath you took when you realized you could not fake being okay anymore, not the trembling in your chest when you whispered, "God, I can't keep doing this." And maybe you did not even say that much. Maybe all that came out was a shaky, "Please." Maybe it was not a prayer anybody would write down. Maybe it was not polished, not theological, not brave-sounding. Maybe it was just pain. But heaven knows how to read pain. Heaven knows how to hear what the mouth cannot fully form. And what you thought was a private breakdown was, in the eyes of God, a holy interruption. Because the world may have watched you function, but God saw you fracture. The people around you may have seen you answer texts, go to work, pay what you could, smile when needed, show up at church, call your daughter back, help your neighbor, throw a load of laundry in, pick up dinner on the way home, and keep moving like you always do. But God saw the part nobody clapped for. He saw how tired you were when the front door closed. He saw how long you sat in the driveway before going inside. He saw you in the Walmart parking lot doing the math in your head. He saw you at the pharmacy line hoping the prescription would cost less than you feared. He saw you at the kitchen table, moving money around like loaves and fish, trying to make not enough become enough. He saw you fold dish towels with tears in your eyes because you were not just tired from one bad day, you were tired from carrying a life that had become heavier than you told anybody. And that is why this message matters tonight, because you need to hear something your exhausted heart has almost forgotten. God does not only visit polished places. He does not only move in sanctuaries, revivals, and neatly worded prayers. He moves in kitchens. He moves in the middle of real life. He moves where the overhead light is too dim, where the linoleum is cold under your feet, where the bills sit in a stack, where the coffee has gone bitter, where the marriage has been quiet, where the children are sleeping down the hall, where the memories are loud, where the grief comes back after everybody else has gone to bed. He moves there. And tonight, chosen one, heaven is not ignoring what happened in that room. Heaven is answering it. Not because your tears manipulated God, not because pain earns salvation, but because your tears were honest. And honesty has a way of opening what pride keeps closed. You were not falling apart in front of strangers. You were not performing your sorrow for sympathy. You were alone, in a kitchen that had seen thousands of ordinary moments. And in one of those moments, you finally stopped pretending to be unbreakable. That matters. There is something sacred about the moment a weary soul tells the truth. There is something powerful about the instant you stop saying, "I'm fine," when you are not fine, and stop trying to sound faithful when what you really are is desperate. God can work with desperate. God can meet exhausted. God can enter rooms where people have run out of speeches. So tonight is not random. This is not just another video, another message, another passing word in a crowded internet full of noise. This is a hand on the shoulder of your spirit. This is a voice cutting through the hum of fear, the hiss of shame, the rattle of unpaid pressure, and saying, "I saw you. I was there. I did not turn away when you cried in that kitchen. I did not leave you standing there alone with your bills, your memories, your fear, your questions, and your silent plea. I saw the tears fall onto that counter, and heaven has already begun to answer in ways you cannot fully see yet. Because that kitchen was not the place where your story fell apart. It was the place where God decided to meet you in the middle of it. And once you understand that, once it settles into your spirit that God saw the exact moment you thought you were most unseen, then you begin to realize that what broke in that kitchen was not your faith at all. It was the final layer of pretending. And what broke in that kitchen was not your faith. It was the last layer of pretending. The last thin shell that had kept you moving through one more morning, one more shift, one more phone call, one more polite smile at church, one more, "I'm good," spoken through a tired face and a tight throat. Chosen one, hear this clearly tonight. You did not cry because you were weak. You cried because you had been strong for too long in all the places where nobody ever stopped to ask what that strength was costing you. You had learned how to function while hurting. You had learned how to carry pressure with a straight back and a steady voice. You had learned how to answer emails, return carts, cook dinner, sit through traffic, refill prescriptions, and nod through conversations while something inside you was quietly wearing down like a tire that had gone too many miles without anyone noticing the tread was almost gone. That is how so many people live in this country. They survive by becoming efficient at hiding. They become dependable while breaking. They become the one everybody calls, the one who always figures it out, the one who keeps the family calendar straight, the one who remembers the doctor appointment, the one who brings the casserole, the one who sends the birthday text, the one who pays what can be paid and postpones what must be postponed, and still somehow shows up looking halfway put together. And after a while, that role starts to feel less like a choice and more like a sentence. You begin to believe that if you stop holding everything up, everything will fall. So you keep going. You keep moving. You keep acting like the burden is manageable, like the silence in your marriage is normal, like the ache in your chest is just stress, like the money situation is temporary, like the grief is under control, like the loneliness is no big deal, like the disappointment did not wound you as deeply as it did. You become fluent in small lies of survival. Not evil lies, human lies, everyday lies. The kind people tell because they do not think they are allowed to need help. The kind people tell because they have children watching, co-workers around, church friends asking casual questions in the lobby, neighbors waving from across the lawn, and a country around them that praises resilience, but often does not know what to do with pain unless it arrives dressed neatly and leaves quickly. So you kept it neat, you kept it brief, You kept it moving. But God was never fooled by the version of you that said, "I'm just tired," when what you really meant was, "I do not know how much longer I can carry this." He was never confused when you said, "It's been a rough week," and what heaven heard was years of swallowed fear, postponed healing, private heartbreak, and quiet disappointment. He saw the truth beneath the script. You saw the tension in your jaw when you stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing off plates you barely had the appetite to dirty in the first place. He saw the way you stared at the same utility bill 3 times because your mind was not even processing the numbers anymore. It was just absorbing the weight. He saw you pause in the middle of putting away groceries because one more carton of eggs, one more bag of bread, one more total at checkout had become a reminder that everything costs more now, and your peace seems to cost the most of all. He saw you come home from work, kick off your shoes near the door, and stand in the kitchen not because you needed anything from the fridge, but because it was the only room where you could be alone for a minute without somebody needing something from you. And in that room, with the hum of the refrigerator and the glow of the stove, and the normalcy of an American household winding down for the night, the truth finally caught up with you. Not because you lost God, but because you lost the energy to perform strength. There is a difference, and that difference matters because many chosen ones have been taught to fear their own tears, as if tears are evidence of spiritual failure, as if composure is holiness, as if the more silent your suffering is, the more mature you must be. But the Bible is not a museum of unshaken people. It is filled with people who wept, groaned, collapsed, questioned, and called out from places of deep weariness. So why have you been made to feel ashamed that you did too? Why have you thought that standing in that kitchen with tears running down your face meant you were losing your faith, when in truth it may have been the first fully honest moment you had offered God in months? Honesty is not rebellion. Honesty is an opening. When you finally said with your body what your mouth had been afraid to confess, heaven did not recoil. Heaven leaned in. Because the moment the performance ended, the real prayer began. And maybe your real prayer did not sound spiritual enough to your own ears. Maybe it sounded more like frustration than faith. Maybe it sounded like, "Lord, I am tired." Maybe it sounded like, "I don't understand this." Maybe it sounded like, "I have done all I know to do." Maybe it sounded like no words at all, just hands over your face and shoulders shaking while the house stayed quiet around you. But do not underestimate what happens when a heart finally stops editing itself before God. That is not the moment heaven turns away. That is often the moment heaven begins to move most deeply. Because pretending blocks tenderness. Pretending keeps you at the surface. Pretending lets you speak to God from behind a wall of polished phrases and acceptable emotions. But the kitchen broke that wall. The counter, the silence, the lateness of the hour, the accumulated weight of ordinary American responsibilities, the fatigue of being the dependable one, all of it came together and pushed you past the point of performance. And once that happened, once that final layer cracked, what spilled out was not weakness but truth. You are not saying, "God is not good." You are saying, "God, I cannot carry this without you anymore." You are not abandoning faith. You are bringing faith out of the realm of slogans and into the room where real life actually happens. You are no longer talking to God as the strong version of yourself. You are finally standing before Him as the real version of yourself. And that is why what happened in that kitchen matters so much. Because it was not merely an emotional moment. It was a spiritual turning point. The place where your image of yourself, as the one who always handles it, began to die. And the deeper truth began to breathe. The truth that you are human. The truth that you have limits. The truth that being chosen does not mean being numb. The truth that being faithful does not mean being unbreakable. The truth that God never asked you to be made of stone. And once that truth begins to settle into your spirit, you start to understand that the tears falling in that ordinary kitchen did not make the room less holy. They made it more so. And that is why the kitchen became an altar without asking your permission, without changing its shape, without glowing, without turning into anything dramatic to the natural eye. Because God has always had a way of claiming ordinary places the moment pain and prayer touch in the same space. It was still the same kitchen, with the same cabinet door that never closed right, the same coffee maker on the counter, the same family calendar pinned to the fridge, the same stack of grocery store coupons, the same bottle of vitamins beside the sink, the same medicine organizer waiting for morning, the same burner where soup had simmered on cold evenings and eggs had been fried before early shifts and grilled cheese had been made for children who once ran through that house with little feet and loud voices. It was the same room where you packed lunches before sunrise, poured coffee into a travel mug before driving to work, reheated leftovers after long days, answered difficult phone calls in a low voice, stood with one hand on the counter while the doctor's office put you on hold, opened insurance letters you dreaded, counted pills, counted dollars, counted days until payday, and tried to make your face calm before anyone else came into the room. It was not decorated like a sanctuary. It did not smell like incense. No choir was singing there. No one laid hands on you there. But chosen one, heaven does not confuse polished settings with holy moments. God is not limited to church pews on Sunday morning. He is not only present when the worship team is in tune and the sermon is strong and the room feels spiritually charged. He enters apartments with thin walls and noisy neighbors. He enters suburban homes where the dishwasher hums and the dog scratches at the back door. He enters mobile homes where every square foot has been fought for and stewarded with care. He enters farmhouses where the mornings begin before daylight and the burdens feel generational. He enters small rented kitchens where the rent keeps rising, the future feels unstable, and the table has held both dinner and despair. He enters split-level homes, duplexes, condos, townhouses, and old houses with fading paint and memories built into the floorboards. He knows how to find his people where they actually live. And that night, when your shoulders bent and your composure finally cracked, heaven did not label it a breakdown first. Heaven recognized it as prayer. Not the polished prayer that sounds beautiful out loud, not the kind somebody repeats into a microphone, but the raw kind. The kind that travels upward through sobbing, through silence, through shaking breath, through hands pressed flat against laminate counters, through eyes swollen with disappointment, through the kind of exhaustion that does not even have the energy to explain itself anymore. That kitchen became an altar because surrender happened there. Something got laid down there. You laid down the illusion that you were still in control. You laid down the need to appear composed. You laid down the pressure to be the dependable one without limits, the mature one without wounds, the strong one without tears. And when you laid that down, whether you had words for it or not, you offered God something real. Altars are not defined by architecture. They are defined by surrender. An altar is wherever truth is brought before God. An altar is wherever the soul stops negotiating and finally says, "This is what I am carrying. This is what I cannot fix. This is where I am afraid. This is where I am hurt. This is where I am out of strength." And if that confession happens under fluorescent light beside a microwave and a fruit bowl and a stack of utility bills, it is no less sacred. In fact, there is something especially tender about the way God meets people in the rooms where they have served everybody else. Think about it. That kitchen had watched you nourish others while neglecting your own heart. It had seen you cut apples for children, stir pasta on tired evenings, wash coffee mugs after guests left, stand there making holiday meals while carrying private grief no one could read on your face. It had seen you host, provide, organize, remember, multitask, clean up, and keep the household moving. And then one night, in that same room where you had spent so much of your life pouring out, God let it become the place where you no longer had to pour out for others, but could finally pour out before Him. That matters. That means something. Because many chosen ones have spent years thinking that the holy places are the places where they perform best, where they speak best, where they look strongest, where they feel most spiritual. But sometimes the holiest place in your life is the room where your last defense fell apart. Sometimes the altar is not where you looked impressive. Sometimes it is where you looked undone. And from that moment, once the kitchen became an altar, the tears that came out of you were no longer about one bad evening, one awkward conversation, one stressful errand, or one disappointing phone call. Because the truth is, you were crying about more than one thing, and heaven knew that too. You were not just reacting to what happened that day. You were releasing what had been building for months, maybe years. You were crying about money pressure, yes, but also about the humiliation of having to think this hard over every purchase. You were crying about the grocery bill rising again and the way your jaw tightened at the checkout when the total came up higher than you hoped. You were crying about the credit cards that had gotten too close to the limit and the way you kept telling yourself you would catch up next month, and then next month came with its own surprises. You were crying about the rent or the mortgage, about the electric bill, about the prescription refill, about the car repair, about the deductible, about the endless arithmetic of American adulthood, where everything seems to cost more than your peace can afford. But it was not only finances. It was the marriage growing colder in ways that do not always show up in public. It was the quiet dinners, the shorter conversations, the emotional distance that can develop between two people sharing the same house and still, somehow, feeling worlds apart. It was lying beside someone at night and feeling alone. It was wanting tenderness and getting routine. It was missing who you used to be together. It was wondering whether things could still soften, still heal, still become warm again. Or maybe the tears were about children. Not the little kind, who need lunch packed and shoes tied, but the grown kind, who make choices that keep you up at night. A son who will not return your calls. A daughter living with someone you know is not good for her. A child who says they are fine when you can hear in their voice that they are not. A grandchild you wish you could protect more than you can. A family fracture that no holiday photo reveals. Maybe part of what broke in you that night came from loving people you cannot control and carrying concern for them in your body like an invisible weight. Maybe it was about health, your own or someone else's. The test result you are still waiting on, the diagnosis already received. The fatigue that never fully leaves, the ache in your back, your knees, your chest, your spirit. The medication side effects, the specialist appointment, the fear that enters quietly when the body begins to speak in ways you do not understand. Maybe it was grief, not the fresh kind that everyone notices, but the long grief that settles into everyday life and changes its texture. The empty chair at Thanksgiving, the voicemail you can no longer hear, the parent who is gone, the spouse who died, the person you used to text, the version of your life you thought you would be living by now. Grief does not only cry at funerals. Sometimes grief stands in the kitchen at 11:30 p.m. and starts crying over nothing obvious, because loss has a way of leaking through daily life when the house finally gets quiet enough. Maybe it was loneliness after divorce, The strange kind that exists even when the TV is on and the lights are still burning. The kind that meets you after church when everybody else seems to have somewhere to go. The kind that sits next to you in the car after the grocery run. The kind that makes a house feel heavier at night. Maybe it was the fatigue of being the dependable one, the one everyone assumes can handle it, the one who keeps showing up, keeps solving, keeps giving, keeps remembering, keeps forgiving, keeps working overtime, keeps smiling in public, keeps saying grace over dinner while privately wondering how much more the soul can hold before it starts to splinter. Heaven saw all of that stacked behind your tears. Heaven saw the layered pain, not just the surface trigger. God did not look at that moment and think, this is only about tonight. He saw the overtime shifts, the early alarms, the church smiles, the careful budgeting, the parking lot pauses before going inside. The Sundays when you lifted your hands while secretly feeling numb. The Wednesdays when you nodded at people in Bible study while your mind was elsewhere. The Sundays when someone asked, "How are you?" and you answered, "Blessed," because explaining the truth felt too exhausting. He saw you sitting in the parked car in your own driveway for 5 extra minutes because you needed one last pocket of silence before stepping back into responsibility. He saw you scroll your bank app and then lock your phone like the numbers might change if you avoided looking too long. He saw you standing in the sanctuary with worship music filling the room while you were barely holding yourself together inside. He saw the pressure you never posted, the shame you never named, the weariness that stayed hidden under normal routines. Chosen one, this is why you must stop minimizing your own tears. You were not overreacting. You were carrying layers. You were not being dramatic. You were reaching a threshold. Pain that is layered does not leave in neat ways. It accumulates. It settles into the nervous system. It hides under errands and appointments and laundry and small talk until one ordinary moment becomes the place where all the unspoken things finally come to the surface at once. And when they did, heaven was not overwhelmed by the complexity of it. God understands layered pain. He understands that people often cry about the electric bill and the marriage and the doctor's call and the loneliness and the memory and the fear all at the same time, because human sorrow is rarely organized into tidy categories. It comes tangled. It comes braided. It comes in waves that carry many names at once. And the good news, chosen one, is that God does not require you to untangle it before bringing it to Him. He does not say, "Come back when you can explain this cleanly." He does not say, "Sort your grief, label your fear, separate your disappointments, then return with a well-managed report." No, He receives the whole knot. He receives the whole ache. He receives the whole layered burden. And even while you were standing there feeling like nothing had changed yet, heaven often moves when no one else notices. That is one of the hardest truths for an exhausted heart to trust. Because when you have been under pressure for a long time, you start looking for dramatic proof. You want the Red Sea to split in front of you, the miracle check in the mail, the instant call with perfect news, the sudden reversal so obvious nobody could question it. And yes, God is able to move in dramatic ways. He is able to open doors overnight, shift circumstances in one moment, heal what looked impossible, turn a story around so clearly that everybody has to say it was the hand of the Lord. But very often, chosen one, the first movement of heaven is quieter than that. The first movement is not always fireworks. Sometimes it is like a lamp turning on in a dark room. Same room, same walls, same furniture. But now there is light where there was only confusion. The answer may begin with peace returning before the circumstances change. It may begin with your breathing slowing the next morning. It may begin with a strange steadiness in your chest, where panic usually lives. It may begin with you waking up after the cry and realizing you are still burdened, but not as crushed. It may begin with clarity coming back. Suddenly you know what phone call you need to make first. You know which expense has to wait and which one cannot. You know which conversation you have been avoiding. You know what boundary needs to be spoken. You know which person is safe and which one keeps draining you. You know the next step. Not the whole 10-year plan, just the next faithful step. And that kind of quiet clarity is not small. That is heaven moving. Maybe it looks like one conversation shifting. The spouse who has been emotionally distant suddenly listens. The adult child who has been defensive softens for 5 minutes. The pastor preaches one sentence that feels like it lands directly in your kitchen from the night before. An old friend texts, "You've been on my mind.
Are you okay?"
And you realize God can use an iPhone notification to break through despair. Maybe it looks like unexpected favor at work. A manager gives you a little grace, a schedule opens up, an opportunity appears. The interview goes differently than expected. The person reviewing your application pauses longer than they normally would. Maybe it looks like a doctor's report changing, not always in a complete miracle on the spot, but in one encouraging update, one better than expected number, one next step that carries hope instead of dread. Maybe it looks like an overdue bill somehow getting covered, a refund you forgot about, a church benevolence check, a relative deciding to help, a company agreeing to a payment arrangement, a burden easing just enough to show you that God is not blind to what numbers do to the human heart. Divine answers do not always arrive with trumpets. Sometimes they arrive through timing so gentle you almost miss it if you are only looking for explosions. That is why you have to train your spirit to recognize quiet mercy. The world teaches you to honor the loud. Heaven often works through the hidden. Think of how many things in your life changed slowly before they changed visibly. Morning comes that way. The sun does not slam into the room all at once. The darkness begins to thin. The edges of things become visible. The outline returns. That is how many answers begin. Not with a shout, but with a softening. Not with everything fixed, but with one burden lifting enough for you to breathe again. Not with the entire mountain gone, but with enough light to find the path around the next bend. Chosen one, do not dismiss the subtle movements of God just because they are not cinematic. The conversation that shifts is a mercy. The panic that loosens is a mercy. The idea that returns is a mercy. The strength to get out of bed and try again is a mercy. The person who calls at the right hour is a mercy. The sermon that names your secret struggle is a mercy. The overdue bill that somehow gets handled is a mercy. The small opening at work is a mercy. The doctor's report that turns a corner is a mercy. The fact that after crying in the kitchen, you did not completely collapse under the weight of it all, but found yourself still standing the next morning, still able to make coffee, still able to whisper, "Lord, help me through today." That too is a mercy. And this matters because if heaven often moves quietly, then you must not think your prayer was ignored simply because the answer did not arrive with thunder. In fact, God is responding to the prayer you could not even finish. He is responding to the prayer that came out in fragments, in unfinished sentences, in sobbing pauses, in whispers spoken over a kitchen counter. Maybe all you said was, "Help me." Maybe all you got out was, "God, please." Maybe your prayer never made it past the first 3 words because the rest dissolved into tears. Maybe you were too tired to sound faithful. Maybe you were too angry to sound gentle. Maybe you did not know what to ask for, because you were not even sure which pain was the loudest anymore. But eloquence has never been the price of entry into God's presence. Heaven understands broken prayer. Heaven understands trembling prayer, exhausted prayer, frustrated prayer, bewildered prayer, the kind of prayer that sounds more like breathing than speaking. Scripture is full of this truth, even when you do not quote chapter and verse at your own sync. God hears groaning. God hears sighing, too deep for polished language. God hears what the soul means when the mouth fails. That means your kitchen prayer was not weak because it was short. It was powerful because it was real. Sometimes the most honest prayer in a season is not a paragraph. It is a gasp. Sometimes the holiest sentence you say all month is, "Lord, I need you." Sometimes all you can offer is a shaking exhale and a heart too bruised to package itself neatly. And chosen one, that is enough for heaven to respond to. You do not need church words to move God. You do not need the right tone, the right rhythm, the right volume, the right spiritual vocabulary. God is not grading your prayer like an essay. He is receiving it like a father. A good father does not ignore his child because the sentence came out broken. A good father leans closer when the child is too overwhelmed to speak clearly. And if earthly parents know how to recognize distress in unfinished words, how much more does your Heavenly Father understand the meaning inside your tears? So stop thinking the prayer failed because you could not finish it. Stop thinking heaven only hears what is articulate. The sincerity of your pain already reached the throne. The tears on that counter were already speaking. The silence in that room was already speaking. The way your shoulders trembled was already speaking. The way you whispered one name, God, as if it was both question and lifeline, was already speaking. He heard the prayer inside the sob. He heard the trust buried under the exhaustion. He heard the faith that still reached for him even when you could barely keep your own thoughts straight. And that should reassure you tonight, because it means you were never disqualified by your weakness. You were never too messy to be heard. You were never too emotionally worn out to be understood. In fact, that unfinished prayer may be one of the clearest signs that your heart still knows exactly where to turn when everything else feels uncertain. You turned toward God before you had language. You reached for heaven before you had a polished sentence. You cried in the kitchen, yes, but those tears were carrying surrender, layered sorrow, quiet trust, and a prayer that did not need to be completed in perfect words to be fully understood by the one who saw you there. And that is why the answer may begin with strength before it shows up as change. Because one of the deepest ways God responds is not always by removing the storm on the first night, but by steadying the person standing in it. Chosen one. Sometimes heaven answers from the inside out. Sometimes the first miracle is not that the bill disappears, the marriage instantly heals, the diagnosis vanishes, or the prodigal child calls before sunrise. Sometimes the first miracle is that you wake up with enough steadiness to face what you were avoiding yesterday. Sometimes the first sign that God has stepped in is not external proof, but internal reinforcement. You wake up after crying in the kitchen, and the house is still the same. The counter is still there. The sink still has a cup in it. The mail is still waiting. The air still carries the leftover scent of coffee and soap and ordinary life. But something in you is not as shattered as it was the night before. The fear may still be present, but it no longer fills the whole room. The problem may still be real, but it no longer owns your entire mind. You may still feel tired, but the despair is no longer sitting on your chest with the same weight. That matters. Do not rush past that. There is a sacred kind of rebuilding that begins when God strengthens your inner frame before He changes your visible surroundings. That is how many real recoveries begin. Not with instant spectacle, but with renewed capacity. Not with noise, but with nerve. Not with everything solved, but with courage returning to places that had gone numb. Suddenly you can think clearly enough to make the doctor's appointment you kept postponing because you were afraid of what you might hear. Suddenly you can open the bills without panicking before you even read them. Suddenly you can sit down at the kitchen table with a pen, a calculator, and a quieter spirit and say, "All right, Lord, show me what to do next." Suddenly you can ask for help. Suddenly you can tell the truth to a trusted friend. Suddenly you can walk back into church, even though last week you felt too ashamed, too drained, too hollow to be around anybody. Suddenly you can say no to mistreatment, where before you kept absorbing what should have been confronted. Suddenly you can fill out the application, send the resume, return the message, set the boundary, make the call, schedule the counseling session, tell your grown child what needed to be said, or tell your own heart that enough is enough. This is what people often miss when they are watching for dramatic deliverance. They assume that if the external world has not rearranged itself yet, then heaven must still be silent. But sometimes, God's first answer is not to move the mountain instantly. Sometimes, it is to put iron in your spirit, so you can stand in front of the mountain differently. Sometimes, it is to restore decision-making where fear had paralyzed it. Sometimes, it is to restore sleep where anxiety had been devouring the night. Sometimes, it is to restore appetite, mental clarity, emotional steadiness, discernment, and holy restraint. And those things are not small. They are not consolation prizes. They are evidence that heaven has entered the situation at a deeper level than appearances can measure. Because what good would it be for a door to open if you are too fragmented inside to walk through it? What good would it be for help to arrive if your soul is too panicked to receive it? What good would it be for God to change everything around you while leaving you unchanged at the center? No, chosen one, heaven is more thorough than that. God cares about the condition of the person living the story, not just the story itself. He is not only trying to fix the scene, He is rebuilding the soul that has to keep walking through it. That is why sometimes you notice a strange strength returning before you can explain why. You make your coffee the next morning and it tastes different, not because the brand changed, but because dread is not coating your mouth with the same bitterness. You stand in the same kitchen, but your knees do not feel quite as weak. You drive the same road, but your thoughts are not racing as hard. You look at the same numbers, but you do not instantly spiral. You still wish the problem were gone, of course you do, but the panic has lost a little territory. And every inch of lost territory matters when fear has been ruling the house for too long. Maybe it shows up in the simplest possible form. You sleep through the night for the first time in weeks. No dramatic dream, no angel at the foot of the bed, just rest. Deep, clean, merciful rest. And when you wake, the problem is not magically erased, but your nervous system is no longer screaming the same way. That is an answer. Maybe it looks like a sentence coming into your mind while you stand by the sink. I do not have to carry this alone. Maybe it looks like the courage to tell your sister, your pastor, your friend, or your counselor the truth, instead of saying, I'm fine. Maybe it looks like choosing not to answer that manipulative text. Maybe it looks like deciding you will not let someone keep speaking to you with disrespect and calling it love. Maybe it looks like setting a boundary with a grown child because enabling is not the same as caring. Maybe it looks like saying, I need prayer, I need support, I need help, and not feeling like failure for needing it. That too is an answer. Because before God changes what is around you, He often strengthens the one standing in the middle of it. And when that strengthening begins, it rarely stays private forever. Because God is sending help through ordinary people too. He often answers with strength inside you and support around you at the same time, weaving both together so quietly that only later do you realize how carefully heaven was arranging it all. The answer may come through a sister who calls at the exact moment your thoughts were getting dark again. She does not even know the whole story, but something in her voice feels like rescue. It may come through a neighbor who drops off soup, cornbread, or a casserole and says, "I just felt led to bring this by." And suddenly, you are standing at the front door blinking back tears, because kindness has a way of reaching places pride cannot defend. It may come through a church friend who offers prayer in the parking lot after service. Not loudly, not performatively. Just a hand on your shoulder and a few simple words that somehow loosen a knot you have carried for months. It may come through a grown son who finally begins to understand what you have been carrying. A daughter who notices more than she used to and quietly steps in. A boss who shows mercy when you expected pressure. A counselor who speaks life with wisdom and steadiness, giving language to wounds you have been dragging around unnamed. A cashier at the grocery store who looks up and says one gentle thing on a day when you were trying not to cry in aisle 7. Chosen one, do not underestimate the way heaven moves through ordinary people. Too many people are waiting for supernatural help while overlooking the fact that God often chooses human hands, familiar voices, simple meals, timely phone calls, and practical support as the very shape His mercy takes. It is still divine help even if it arrives in jeans and work boots, in a church cardigan, in a nurse's scrubs, in a text bubble, in a bag of groceries, in someone saying, "I can watch the kids," or "I'll go with you," or "Let me help cover this," or "You do not have to handle this by yourself." Heaven has always loved incarnation. God does not merely send abstract comfort, He often wraps it in people. And yes, people can wound. That is part of why this truth can be hard to trust. Some of the deepest pain in your life may have come through human beings, through what they said, what they failed to say, what they did, what they withheld, what they misunderstood. But do not let the memory of harmful people blind you to the possibility of helpful ones. The same God who knows what was taken through human relationships also knows how to send restoration through human relationships. He knows how to place the right voice in the right hour. He knows how to let one person's compassion interrupt your isolation. He knows how to send community in doses your weary heart can tolerate. That is why you must pay attention to the ordinary channels of grace around you. The person who keeps checking in may not be random. The invitation to lunch may not be random. The recommendation for a counselor may not be random. The friend who says, "I was just thinking about you," may not be random. The grown child who softens may not be random. The pastor's message that names your exact struggle may not be random. Even a small kindness can become a hinge in a heavy season. One decent conversation can hold your heart together for another week. One prayer can become a turning point. One act of mercy can break shame's spell and remind you that you are still seen. So if you have felt alone, do not assume aloneness is the whole truth. Look again. Heaven may already be moving through your community in ways you have not fully recognized. And that is why tonight marks a turning point. Not because life is suddenly easy, but because God has stepped in. That is the difference. The turning point is not defined by the total disappearance of difficulty. It is defined by the entrance of divine presence into the difficulty. The chosen one's whole life may not transform in one night. The overdue bill may still need to be paid. The marriage may still need conversation, repentance, healing, patience. The diagnosis may still need treatment. The child may still need time. The grief may still come in waves. But once heaven enters the pain is no longer alone with you. Once God steps in, the meaning of the room changes. Fear may still knock, but it no longer owns the house. Hopelessness may still whisper, but it no longer gets the final vote. Shame may still try to convince you that your story is ending in this hard place. But now there is another voice in the room, stronger, steadier, truer. And you begin to feel that shift in ways that are hard to explain to anyone who has never lived it. Tomorrow's coffee will taste different. Not because your life has become perfect overnight, but because despair no longer has the same grip on your mouth. The same kitchen will feel different because now you know God was there. The same house will feel different because a place that once felt like the scene of collapse now also feels like the place where heaven touched down. The same bills may still sit on the counter, but they are no longer the only thing sitting there. Now there is memory. Now there is witness. Now there is the knowledge that the God who saw you crying did not turn away. That changes the room. That changes the way you walk through it. That changes how you face the next morning, the next errand, the next appointment, the next Sunday, the next conversation. A turning point is not always flashy. Sometimes it is the quiet moment when you realize, I am not where I was last night. I am not as alone as I thought. I am not as crushed as I was. Something has shifted. Something holy has entered. Dignity begins to return. You stop feeling like a victim of the moment and start remembering that you are still a person with agency, with worth, with breath, with a future, with a God who sees. Fear loses some control. It does not vanish all at once, but it loses its absolute authority. You may still tremble, but you no longer tremble without hope. You may still be tired, but you are tired in the presence of God now. And that is different from being tired in despair. You may still cry again, but the next tears will not mean abandonment. They will fall in a room already claimed by mercy. That is why tonight matters. Not because every answer has fully manifested yet, but because the next chapter began where you thought the story was breaking down. And once a turning point has begun, then you can hear this next truth with the authority it deserves. What made you cry will not have the final word. The bill will not have the final word. The betrayal will not have the final word. The diagnosis will not have the final word. The rejection will not have the final word. The silence, the delay, the heartbreak, the fear, the grief, the shame, the coldness in the marriage, the prodigal child, the exhausting season, the stretched thin finances, the lonely nights, the unanswered questions. None of it gets to write the ending over your life. Chosen one, speak that into your spirit tonight. What made me cry will not write my ending, because God saw the tears, and because He saw them, heaven has entered the matter. And when heaven enters the matter is no longer sealed in the shape you first feared. God is not a passive observer of your private pain. He is not merely documenting your sorrow. He is working in it, through it, under it, around it, above it. He is threading redemption through things that still look unfinished from where you stand. That is why you must not build your theology from your worst night alone. Do not let the moment at the counter become a prophecy of defeat. Let it become a marker of divine encounter instead. One day, the very kitchen where you cried may be the kitchen where you stand stronger, wiser, softer in some places, firmer in others, able to look back and say, I did not know it then, but God had already begun answering me here. One day, you may stand in that same room, making coffee with a steadier hand, talking to someone else whose heart is breaking, and you will be able to tell them, I know what it is to cry in a place like this. I know what it is to think no one sees, but I also know what it is for God to meet a person right where life got too heavy. What broke you in private may become the testimony that strengthens someone else in public. What humbled you may become the story that heals another person's shame. What made you feel small may become the place where God revealed how attentive He actually is. Because that is His way. He redeems rooms. He redeems nights. He redeems tears. He redeems the places people would rather forget. The kitchen where you cried may one day feel less like a crime scene and more like holy ground. Not because the pain was pleasant, not because you will romanticize what happened, but because you will know, with the sober gratitude of someone who has lived through it, that heaven moved there before you could even name what was happening. And that brings us back to the opening image, back to the chosen one in the kitchen at night, crying where no audience could see, where no one clapped, where no one reposted the pain, where no one gave language to the weight, because most of it could not even be explained in a way that would fit into one conversation. God saw every second of it. He saw the burden you could not explain. He saw the prayer you could not finish. He saw the fear you tried to hide even from yourself. He saw the exhaustion you carried so long it had started to feel normal. He saw the hand on the counter, the shoulders shaking, the swollen eyes, the unopened mail, the weary soul, the way the whole room felt both too small and too quiet at the same time. He saw all of it. And tonight, heaven is not ignoring you. Heaven is responding. The answer may come through peace first. It may come through strength, direction, provision, people, timing, practical help, restored sleep, a softened heart, a door opening, a burden lifting, a courage returning, or a breakthrough you cannot yet fully picture. But it is coming from a God who did not overlook your pain. That means you are not forgotten. You are not invisible. You are not abandoned. The tears were real, yes. The fear was real. The pressure was real. The loneliness may have been real enough to make the walls feel closer than usual. But so is the answer. So is the mercy. So is the nearness of God. So is the movement of heaven. The kitchen was not the place where you were left behind. It was the place heaven began to move. And chosen one, before this word ends, hold on to that truth and make it personal. Let it settle into the exact rooms of your life. If you are hearing this, and you know this message found you in your own kitchen season, in your own midnight season, in your own season of bills and fear and private tears, then do not just listen and move on. Receive it. Let it become part of your language. Let it become a line you repeat when fear comes back. God saw me there. Heaven is answering. God saw me there. Heaven is answering. And if this spoke directly to your spirit, leave a sign of agreement in the comments. Something simple like, God saw me in the kitchen, or heaven is answering tonight. Let that be your declaration. Let it be your witness. Let it help the next person scrolling in silence realize they are not alone either. And if someone you love is in a season like this, send this to them. Because sometimes God uses one shared message the way He uses one casserole, one phone call, one prayer in a parking lot, one kind word at the register, one ordinary act of care to carry a person through the hardest part of the night. Stay close to God in this season. Stay honest. Stay open. Keep bringing him the real prayer, not the polished one. And remember this, chosen one. The night was real, but so is the answer. The tears were real, but so is the God who saw them. The kitchen was ordinary, but what happened there was holy.